What would you do if 5 Navy SEALs accused you of stolen valor right in front of your daughter? This father stayed silent. He didn't defend himself. He didn't explain. And that silence nearly cost him everything. But when his 8-year-old daughter pointed at his tattoo and said 5 words, the entire room froze. Because what those SEALs were staring at wasn't just ink. It was a mark that shouldn't exist. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If you enjoy stories about hidden sacrifice and quiet heroism, consider subscribing. What happened next would change everything they thought they knew about the man sitting across from them. The late afternoon light cut through the dusty windows of the Meadowlark Diner like amber through glass, casting long shadows across the cracked vinyl booths and worn linoleum floor. The air smelled of burnt coffee and fryer grease, familiar and heavy, the kind of smell that clung to your clothes long after you left. A crackling radio played old country music from somewhere behind the counter, competing with the low hum of conversation and the occasional clink of silverware against ceramic plates. Rowan Fletcher sat in the corner booth with his back against the wall, his eyes tracking the door without seeming to look at it directly. It was an old habit, one he had stopped questioning years ago. His daughter Pepper sat across from him, her messy ponytail bouncing slightly as she hunched over a paper placemat, coloring with crayons the waitress had given her. She wore a soccer jersey 2 sizes too big, the sleeves rolled up past her elbows, and she hummed softly to herself as she worked. The diner was half full. A trucker sat hunched at the counter, scrolling through his phone. An elderly couple occupied a booth near the window, eating in comfortable silence. The waitress, a woman named Jolene with kind eyes and tired shoulders, moved between tables with the efficiency of someone who had been doing this for decades. Pepper looked up from her drawing, a stick-figure family taking shape in bright primary colors. She reached across the table and stole a French fry from her father's plate, grinning when he raised an eyebrow at her. "Can we get a dog?" she asked. "Maybe," Rowan said. "When we have a yard. We have a yard. A bigger yard." She giggled and went back to her coloring, adding what looked like a dog to the stick-figure family. Rowan watched her for a moment, something softening in his face, then reached for his coffee mug. As he lifted it, his jacket sleeve rode up slightly, revealing the edge of a tattoo on his forearm. Dark ink. Precise lines. Intricate detail. He noticed immediately and pulled the sleeve back down, a movement so practiced it seemed unconscious. Jolene appeared at the table with a coffee pot. "You two need anything else, hun?" she asked. "We're good," Rowan said. "Thank you." His voice was quiet, polite, the kind of voice that didn't draw attention or invite conversation. Jolene nodded and moved on, and the moment settled back into its previous rhythm. The bell above the door jingled. 5 men entered, all of them in their mid to late 20s, muscular in the way that came from discipline rather than vanity. They wore Navy-issued unit jackets over casual clothes, and the Trident insignias were visible even from across the room. Their voices carried, loud with the kind of energy that came after a hard day of training, when the body was tired, but the mind was still wired. They claimed a large booth near the center of the diner, their movements easy and confident. One of them, a man with a buzz cut and a natural command in his posture, flagged Jolene down and ordered for the group. Burgers, coffee, pie. The kind of meal you earned. Rowan's posture changed. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but Pepper noticed. She had known her father long enough to read the small shifts in his body language. His shoulders tightened. His coffee mug stayed raised a beat too long before he set it down. His eyes, which had been tracking the door, now tracked nothing. "Dad," Pepper said quietly. "You okay?" "Yeah, Pep," he said, "just tired." But she knew it was a lie. She had seen this before, the way he sometimes went still and distant, like he was listening to something she couldn't hear. The 5 men settled into their booth, their conversation drifting across the diner in fragments. One of them, the buzz-cut man they called Hackett, was telling a story about a navigation exercise gone wrong. Another, a quieter man named Deegan, corrected details with the ease of someone who had been there. A third man, Stroud, made a joke that got the table laughing. Rowan focused on his eggs, cutting them slowly, deliberately. Pepper watched him, then glanced over at the Navy men. She didn't understand what was wrong, but she could feel the tension radiating from her father like heat from asphalt. Hackett's voice cut through the noise. He was mid-laugh when his eyes drifted across the diner, scanning without purpose, and landed on Rowan's booth. His laughter faded slightly. His gaze sharpened. Rowan reached for the ketchup bottle. His sleeve rode up again. Just for a second. Just long enough. Hackett nudged Deegan and nodded toward the corner booth. Deegan looked. His expression shifted, curiosity replacing casual amusement. "Check that guy's arm," Hackett said, his voice low but not low enough. Deegan leaned forward, squinting slightly. "Is that what I think it is?" "What?" Stroud asked, leaning in. "Trident ink," Hackett said. "Or something close." All 5 men glanced over now, trying to be subtle and failing. Their conversation quieted, became more focused. Rowan didn't look up. He pulled his sleeve down and returned to his meal, his jaw tightening imperceptibly. Pepper's crayon slowed. She looked at the Navy men, then back at her father. "Dad," she said again, softer this time. "Finish your food, Pep," he said gently. The Navy men's voices drifted again, quieter now, but still audible in the hush that had settled over their booth. "Could be legit," the youngest one, Lorne, said. "Or he bought it online," Stroud replied. "You know how many fakes are out there? Placement looks too specific," Hackett said. "Could be another unit, Birch, the oldest of them," suggested. "Army Special Forces uses similar imagery." "Doesn't feel right," Deegan said. "Look at him. He's trying not to be noticed." "That's exactly what a poser would do," Hackett said. Rowan's hand tightened around his fork. He cut another piece of egg, chewed slowly, swallowed. His movements were deliberate, controlled, like he was counting each action to keep himself calm. Pepper had stopped coloring entirely now. She was watching the Navy men with wide eyes, confused and increasingly upset. Hackett stood. He stretched, rolling his shoulders, then started walking toward the counter. His path took him directly past Rowan's booth. He slowed as he passed, glanced down. His eyes landed on Rowan's arm, where the sleeve had ridden up again, just slightly. Rowan didn't look up. Hackett paused. He opened his mouth, closed it, then continued to the counter. But the moment hung in the air, heavy and unresolved. When he returned to his table, his crew leaned in immediately. "It's a trident," Hackett said, "modified. I've never seen that exact design." "Then it's fake," Stroud said. "Or classified," Birch said quietly. "There's no classified trident variants," Lorne said. "It's standardized." "Not always," Deegan said. Silence settled over their table. The air in the diner felt thicker now, like pressure building before a storm. "What are you saying?" Birch asked. "I'm saying there were units," Deegan replied. "Before my time. Operations nobody talks about." "Ghost stories," Stroud said dismissively. "Maybe," Deegan said, "but every ghost story starts somewhere." Hackett stood again. This time, he didn't pretend. He walked straight to Rowan's booth and stopped at the edge of the table. "Hey man," he said, "sorry to bother you." Rowan looked up. His face was neutral, unreadable. Pepper stopped coloring and stared at the stranger standing over them. "No problem," Rowan said. "That ink on your arm," Hackett said. "Mind if I ask where you got it?" The question hung in the air. Rowan met Hackett's eyes, and for just a moment, something passed between them. Recognition, maybe, or warning. "A shop," Rowan said finally. "Long time ago." "Which shop? Don't remember the name." "You don't remember?" "It was a long time ago." Hackett's expression shifted, friendlier on the surface but harder underneath. "It's just, it looks like a trident. Navy SEAL insignia. We're SEALs. Just got done with training. And we see a lot of guys wearing stuff they didn't earn, you know?" "I understand," Rowan said. "So," Hackett pressed, "did you earn it?" The silence that followed was suffocating. Rowan didn't answer, didn't defend himself, didn't engage. He just sat there, calm and still, like a man who had made peace with being misunderstood. Pepper looked up, at her father, confusion and concern warring in her young face. "Dad," she said softly. "Finish your food, Pep," Rowan said gently, not taking his eyes off Hackett. "If you've made it this far, maybe you know someone like Rowan, someone who carries more than they'll ever say. If this story resonates with you, take a moment to subscribe and stay for what happens next. You won't want to miss it." Hackett walked back to his table, his jaw set in a way that told his teammates everything they needed to know. The other 4 leaned in immediately, their voices dropping to whispers that still carried across the quiet diner. What did he say? Stroud asked. Wouldn't answer, Hackett replied. Just dodge the question. Then it's fake, Lawrence said, his voice carrying an edge of certainty. Or he doesn't owe us an explanation, Birch countered, though his tone suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. Come on, Stroud said. If you earned it, you say so. End of story. Not always, Deegan said quietly, staring at his coffee cup. What do you mean? Hackett asked. Some guys don't talk, Deegan said. Doesn't mean they're lying. Or it means they've got nothing to back it up, Stroud shot back. I say we call him out, Lawrence said, respectfully, but directly. Let it go, Birch said. Not our business. It is our business, Hackett said, standing again. That's our trident. He walked back across the diner, each step deliberate. The elderly couple by the window had stopped eating. The trucker at the counter had turned slightly on his stool. Even Jolene had paused mid-wipe, her rag frozen against the counter. Hackett stopped at Rowan's table, closer this time, his posture more confrontational, even as his voice stayed measured. Look, he said. I'm not trying to be difficult, but we see guys wearing our insignia all the time who never served. It's disrespectful. To us. To the men who died wearing it. I understand, Rowan said, his voice unchanged. So, were you a SEAL? The question landed like a stone in still water. Rowan looked up at Hackett, his expression calm, but his eyes carrying something heavier, something that suggested this conversation was costing him more than it appeared. I'm choosing not to answer that, Rowan said. Why? Because I don't need to. From across the room, Stroud's voice rose just loud enough for the entire diner to hear. That's what they all say. The atmosphere shifted. Conversations at other tables stopped entirely. Jolene set down her rag. The elderly woman clutched her husband's hand. The trucker turned fully around on his stool. Pepper looked up from her placemat, her eyes moving between the Navy man standing over her father and her father's unnaturally calm face. My dad's not a liar, she said, her voice small but clear. Hackett's expression softened slightly, discomfort flickering across his features. Kid, I'm not saying he's lying exactly. I'm just trying to understand. Yes, you are, Pepper said, her voice gaining strength. You're saying he's lying. Pepper, Rowan said, his tone firm but gentle. It's okay. But it's not okay, she said, tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. They're being mean. They're not being mean, Rowan said. They're protecting something that matters. I respect that. Birch stood from his booth and walked over, his movements measured and careful. He was older than the others, maybe early 30s, with the kind of bearing that suggested he had seen more than his share of difficult situations. Then, why not just tell us the truth, he asked, his voice quieter than Hackett's, but no less insistent. Because the truth doesn't change anything, Rowan said, meeting his eyes. Deegan rose next, drawn by something he couldn't name, something in Rowan's posture or voice that felt familiar in a way that unsettled him. What unit were you with? He asked. I wasn't asking for your respect, Rowan said. I wasn't asking for anything. I just want to finish my meal with my daughter. And we just want to know if you're disrespecting our brothers, Stroud said, standing now as well, his voice louder than necessary. The tension in the room had reached a breaking point. Every eye in the diner was on the corner booth. Jolene had moved closer, her hand hovering near the phone behind the counter. The trucker had shifted his weight forward as if preparing to intervene. Pepper's hands were shaking. She looked at her father, at the 5 large men surrounding their table, and something broke loose inside her. The frustration, the confusion, the protective fury of a child who couldn't understand why her father wouldn't just tell them he was telling the truth. She reached across the table and grabbed his jacket sleeve, pulling it up before he could stop her. It's this one, right? She said, her voice cracking. The one you keep asking about? Pepper, Rowan said, trying to pull his arm back. But it was too late. The tattoo was fully visible now, exposed under the harsh fluorescent lights of the diner. And it was not what any of them expected. The design was a trident, but wrong in ways that made it impossible to look away. The anchor at the base was wrapped tightly in barbed wire, each barb rendered in painful detail. The eagle's wings weren't spread in proud display, but torn, feathers missing, the edges jagged as if ripped away. And surrounding the entire image, where there should have been 12 stars, there were 13. But it was the scar that held their attention longest. A thin, jagged line cut directly through the center of the tattoo, old and pale against his skin, disrupting the ink in a way that spoke of trauma and survival. The 5 Navy SEALs stared. Deegan's face drained of color. His mouth opened slightly, then closed. He took a step closer, leaning down to see more clearly, as if he couldn't trust what his eyes were telling him. "Oh my God," he whispered. "What?" Hackett said, his voice tight. "That's not standard issue," Deegan said, his voice trembling slightly. "So, it is fake," Stroud said, but his voice had lost its certainty. "No," Deegan said, shaking his head slowly. "It's real. It's just not supposed to exist." The room seemed to tilt. Birch moved forward, his eyes locked on the tattoo, specifically on the 13 stars arranged in a circle around the modified trident. "What are you talking about, Deegan?" Birch asked, his command voice emerging. Deegan pointed at the stars with a shaking finger. 13, he said. "Not 12. 13. Silence. "Task unit. 13, Deegan said, the words barely audible. "That's a myth," Lorne said, but he sounded like he was trying to convince himself. "No," Birch said quietly, his eyes never leaving the tattoo. "It's not." The air in the diner had changed completely. What had been hostility and suspicion had transformed into something else entirely. Something that felt like recognition and horror combined. Birch spoke again, this time directing his words to his team, but making no effort to lower his voice. "Task Unit 13 operated between 2007 and 2009, he said. "Black ops, deep cover, they didn't exist on paper." "What happened to them?" Hackett asked, his earlier confidence completely gone. 13 original members, Birch said. "Most didn't come home." "How many survived?" Stroud asked. 3, Birch said. "Maybe 4. Records were sealed. The unit was disbanded." Deegan finally looked away from the tattoo and met Rowan's eyes. "And the ones who made it out," he said slowly. "They don't talk about it." "Because there's nothing to say," Rowan said, his voice carrying a weight that filled the room. The elderly couple at the window had gone completely still. The trucker's hand had moved to cover his mouth. Jolene had tears in her eyes, though she probably didn't understand why. Pepper was staring at her father's arm, at the tattoo she had seen 100 times before, but never really looked at. She reached out and touched the scar that cut through it, her small finger tracing the raised line. "Does it hurt?" she asked quietly. "Not anymore," Rowan said. Birch pulled out his phone, his movement sudden and decisive. He stepped away from the booth, pressing the phone to his ear. The others watched him walk toward the door, his voice too low to hear, but his posture radiating urgency. The wait felt endless. Rowan sat perfectly still, his arms still exposed on the table, the tattoo on full display. Pepper held his other hand under the table, squeezing hard. When Birch returned, his face had changed. The skepticism was gone, replaced by something that looked like reverence mixed with grief. He stopped at the booth and met Rowan's eyes. "I just spoke to someone at Warcom," he said. "They confirmed Task Unit 13. He paused, and the pause stretched long enough that everyone in the diner seemed to hold their breath. "And they confirmed your name," Birch continued. "Rowan Fletcher, Operator, Unit 13. "They shouldn't have told you that," Rowan said. "I know," Birch replied. The 5 Navy SEALs stood in a loose circle around the booth now, but their postures had completely transformed. The aggression was gone. The suspicion had evaporated. What remained was something rawer, more human. If someone you love has ever carried a burden in silence, you understand what happened in that diner. This story isn't over yet. Stay with us to see how it ends, and if it moves you, consider subscribing. Stories like this matter. Hackett was the first to move. He stepped forward, his earlier swagger completely absent, replaced by something that looked like shame and respect, warring for dominance on his face. He stopped at the edge of the booth and stood straighter, almost at attention. "Sir," he said, and the word carried weight it hadn't before. "I'm sorry, we were completely out of line." "You weren't," Rowan said, his voice steady. "You were looking out for your brothers. That's what you're supposed to do." "Still," Hackett continued, "we should have known better than to assume." "How could you know?" Rowan said. "We don't exist. That was the point." Stroud stepped forward next, the man who had been loudest in his accusations, who had called Rowan a fake from across the room. His face was pale, his jaw tight. "But you do exist," he said, "and you should be recognized." Rowan shook his head slowly. "No," he said. "The ones who didn't come back, they should be recognized. I'm just the guy who remembers them." The words hung in the air like smoke. Deegan, who had been standing slightly apart from the others, moved closer. His eyes were still on the tattoo, on the 13 stars, and the torn wings and the scar that bisected it all. "That's why you don't talk about it," Deegan said. It wasn't a question. "Every time I tell the story," Rowan said quietly, "I have to say their names. And every time I say their names, I remember how they died." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the radio behind the counter seemed to have gone quiet, though that might have been a trick of perception, the way the entire world can seem to stop when something sacred is being acknowledged. Birch spoke next, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had led men in combat. "How many?" he asked. Rowan looked at him for a long moment before answering. 10, he said. "Out of 13. The number landed like a physical blow. Lorne, the youngest of the SEALs, made a sound that might have been a curse or a prayer. Hackett closed his eyes briefly. Stroud's hand came up to cover his mouth. "Jesus Christ," Lorne whispered. Pepper had been listening to all of this with wide eyes, not understanding all the words, but understanding the emotion behind them perfectly. She squeezed her father's hand tighter, and he squeezed back, a small gesture of reassurance. "What did you do?" Lorne asked, then immediately shook his head. "I'm sorry. That's not my place to ask." "Things that don't go in reports," Rowan said simply. "Things that needed to be done and couldn't be acknowledged. We knew that going in. We all volunteered." Birch nodded slowly, understanding passing between him and Rowan that needed no further words. The elderly couple by the window was openly crying now, the wife's hand pressed to her mouth, her husband's arm around her shoulders. The trucker at the counter had his head bowed, as if in prayer. Hackett seemed to struggle with something, then spoke again. "When?" he asked. "When did you serve?" "07 through 09, Rowan said. "Mostly 08. "Afghanistan," Birch said. It wasn't a question. "And other places," Rowan replied. "Places that don't have names on maps." The 5 SEALs stood there, and one by one, without any discussion or coordination, they came to the same decision. Stroud was first, stepping forward and extending his hand. Rowan took it, and they shook. Stroud's grip firm, and his eyes holding Rowan's. "Thank you," Stroud said, "for what you did, for what you lost." Rowan nodded, accepting the words without false modesty or deflection. Stroud stepped back, and Lorne moved forward next, then Deegan, then Hackett. Each man shook Rowan's hand. Each man said, "Thank you." Each man carried something different in his eyes when he stepped away. Birch was last. He approached the booth and extended his hand, but before Rowan could take it, Birch shifted into a different posture entirely. He brought his hand up in a sharp, precise salute. "For your brothers," Birch said, "the ones who didn't make it home." Rowan's composure cracked, just slightly, just enough to see the grief that lived beneath the calm surface. He stood slowly, carefully, and returned the salute. When his hand came down, his eyes were wet. "Thank you," Rowan said, his voice rough. Birch lowered his hand and then did something unexpected. He reached into his wallet and pulled out a card, setting it on the table. "If you ever need anything," he said, "anything at all, you call that number, day or night." Rowan looked at the card but didn't pick it up. "I appreciate that," he said. "I mean it," Birch said. "You're not alone, not anymore." The 5 men began to move away from the booth, their movements slow and respectful, like mourners leaving a gravesite. They returned to their own table, and without discussion, Hackett pulled out his wallet and left enough cash to cover not just their meal, but Rowan's as well, along with a generous tip for Jolene. They walked to the door in single file, each man glancing back once at the corner booth, where Rowan had sat back down with his daughter. Then they were gone, the bell above the door jingling softly in their wake. The diner remained quiet for several long moments. Then, slowly, like a held breath being released, the normal sounds began to return. The elderly couple resumed their meal, though they kept glancing over at Rowan's booth. The trucker turned back to his coffee. The radio behind the counter seemed to grow louder again. Jolene approached with the coffee pot, her eyes red-rimmed, but her smile genuine. She set a fresh slice of pie in front of Pepper without being asked. "On the house," she said. Then she looked at Rowan and refilled his coffee. "This too," she said quietly. "You don't have to do that," Rowan said. "I know," Jolene replied. She paused, then added, "My son's in the army, deployed right now, second tour. So, yeah, I do have to." She walked away before Rowan could respond, and he sat there with his refilled coffee cup and his daughter's hand in his, the weight of the last 20 minutes settling over him like a familiar coat. Pepper looked up at him, her eyes searching his face. "Dad," she said softly. "Yeah, Pep. Are you a hero?" Rowan smiled, but it was a sad smile, the kind that carried too much history. "No, sweetheart," he said. "I'm just your dad. But they said you did important things. I did what I was asked to do. A lot of people did. Most of them did it better than me. But you're the one who came home." "Yeah," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm the one who came home." Pepper seemed to consider this, her young mind working through concepts too heavy for her years. Then she said something that cut through all the complexity and reached the simple truth at the center of everything. "I think that makes you a hero too," she said, "because you remember them, because you don't let them be forgotten." Rowan's eyes filled again, and this time he didn't try to hide it. He reached across the table and pulled his daughter into an awkward hug across the booth, holding her tight. "Thanks, Pep," he said, his voice breaking slightly. They sat like that for a moment, father and daughter, while the diner continued its normal rhythm around them. When they finally separated, Pepper went back to her drawing, adding more details to the stick figure family. Rowan noticed she had drawn a row of small stars above the figures, 13 of them, arranged in a careful circle. He didn't ask her why, he just watched her color them in, one by one, with a yellow crayon. When they finally stood to leave, Rowan left the card Birch had given him on the table, but Pepper picked it up and handed it to him. "You should keep it," she said, "just in case." He looked at her, at the wisdom in her young eyes, and nodded. He slipped the card into his wallet. They walked to the door together, Rowan's hand resting on Pepper's shoulder, her hand holding his. The late afternoon light had shifted, the amber glow now deepening into the rich gold of approaching evening. Their truck sat in the gravel parking lot, dusty and ordinary, waiting to carry them home. Before they reached it, Rowan paused and looked back at the diner one last time. Through the window, he could see Jolene clearing their booth, the elderly couple still sitting by their window, the trucker hunched over his phone. Normal life, continuing as it always did, as it always would. He thought about the 10 names carved into his memory, the faces he saw every time he closed his eyes, the voices he heard in dreams. He thought about the missions that would never be declassified, the operations that existed only in the memories of the 3 or 4, men who survived them. He thought about the choice he had made, years ago, to carry those memories in silence rather than let them become stories told by people who hadn't been there. And he thought about his daughter, who had defended him without understanding what she was defending, who had exposed the truth without knowing the weight of what she was revealing, who loved him simply because he was her dad, regardless of what he had done or who he had been before she existed. "Come on, Pep," he said. "Let's go home." They climbed into the truck, and as they pulled out of the parking lot, the sun caught the edge of Rowan's forearm, where his sleeve had ridden up one last time. The tattoo was visible in the fading light. 13 stars, torn wings, barbed wire, and the scar, cutting through it all, a reminder that some things survive even when they're broken. The truck turned onto the highway and disappeared into the evening, leaving the Meadowlark Diner behind. A small building on a small road where something significant had happened, something that the people who witnessed it would remember and talk about in quiet voices for years to come. Sometimes the people who deserve recognition the most are the ones who never ask for it. If this story touched you, or if you know someone who carries their sacrifices quietly, share this with them. And if stories like this matter to you, we'd be honored if you subscribed. Thank you for listening.